Welcome to the Helicopter Dirty Dozen. I am James Dangerfield, an Airworthiness FAASteam Program Manager, or FPM, from the West Columbia, South Carolina Flight Standards District Office, or FSDO. I have an A&P and an inspection authorization, and I've been a helicopter mechanic or inspector most of my career. I want to definitely push out a thanks to Chris Holder of Concord Batteries and the industry partners for sponsoring this great training event. This event links industry with the maintenance professionals to better both organizations, and it's greatly appreciated. I put this presentation together because of the lack of attention I had seen in the human factors arena with the rotary wing aircraft. I did use the FAASteam original Airplane Dirty Dozen as a template to build this presentation from, so I must give Guy Miner credit for writing the skeleton. And of course, I'm going to identify those 12 causes of maintenance error that are going to show up here in just a few minutes, and also show you some suggestions on how to reduce those errors. So you're going to notice this is an airplane, of course. I couldn't find a good picture of anyone ejecting out of a helicopter, so I had to use this fixed wing example. Human error is both universal and inevitable. This means everyone will make a mistake sooner or later. In fact, the best people often make the worst mistakes. When learning of an accident caused by human error, it's common to think the person involved is somehow deficient in skill or character, while we, on the other hand, are well-meaning, motivated, experienced technicians. We just wouldn't do something that stupid. When we think in these terms, we discount the moral of the story and miss the lesson of it. This is a picture of a spectacular accident caused by human error. The pilot started the loop at about 1,000 feet, 100 feet lower than he should have. Because before takeoff, the pilot set his altimeter to his home base airfield elevation, and his actions perhaps were the result of habit. The elevation of Mountain Home Air Force Base, the site of the flight demonstration, was about 1,100 feet higher than Nellis. Even though this mistake was slight, setting the wrong altimeter setting, the outcome was tragic. So here's the lesson. Does the Air Force select mediocre pilots for the Thunderbird demonstration team? Not likely. They choose only the best of the best. The reason that the best people make the worst mistakes is they are assigned to the riskiest job. The point is, you can be the sharpest person on your crew, but if you have a sleepless night or someone doesn't give you vital information, you might make a mistake. We're going to give you some suggested safety nets as we go through the presentation to help prevent these things from happening to you. Or maybe I did find someone ejecting out of a helicopter. This is of course, this is a prank. This is done by Rotor Floater is the name of the website. It's a doctored up photo of an aircraft with a person ejecting out of it. And I have to put that up there because we have international people all over the world listening to this, hopefully. Okay, we're going to go to a video here and show you about pre-flight after heavy helicopter maintenance. Welcome to this installment of the FAA's Rotorcraft Collective Series. We've been taught from day one that a safe flight is preceded by a comprehensive pre-flight inspection. Do you know where to concentrate your efforts on a pre-flight after maintenance? Let's cover a few good practices for your next pre-flight, stressing after maintenance items. Summer 2016. A pilot from the Tennessee Valley Authority was killed in a Bell 407 on a flight to Hickory, Kentucky. During a routine landing at about 75 feet, the helicopter suddenly went sideways, rolled, and hit the ground on its right side. Investigators found the collective lever disconnected from the pivot sleeve, and its attaching hardware was found in the wreckage near the main rotor hub. The collective lever had not been safety wired, allowing the screws to work themselves out after only 38 flight hours. That's just one example of the vital importance of a solid pre-flight after maintenance or an inspection. An aircraft coming out of maintenance demands a thorough look over.
Here's what we recommend you focus on. If possible, have the mechanic performing the work or a quality assurance person walk around the aircraft with you. He or she can point out things we as pilots might miss. Review the maintenance records, including any previous squawks, to see what work was completed and focus on those areas during your inspection. Check the aircraft for panels or cowlings that may have been opened or removed. Always remember that maintenance in one area might require work involving system elements in completely separate locations. Now you are ready to perform a heavy post-maintenance pre-flight. Let's look at some best practices for the pre-flight inspection. Prepare and use a pre-flight kit, including everything necessary for a thorough inspection. Flashlights, inspection mirror, the current pre-flight inspection checklist, and any other tools or materials needed to access the aircraft, including work stands or ladders. Include that pre-flight kit in your tool control program. Perform the pre-flight with the cowlings removed so you can look at the flight controls, transmission, or other work areas that would otherwise be inaccessible. Take a hard look for foreign objects like tools, pieces of safety wire, or hardware that may have been left behind. Look at bolt and screw heads with safety wire holes that may be missing safety wire. That's what destroyed the accident aircraft, and it was never caught on the subsequent pre-flights. Challenge yourself to find something wrong or out of place. Actively use a formal pre-flight checklist during inspections. Note steps completed and items of concern. Do you check the following on your heavy post-maintenance pre-flight? The areas where maintenance was done. Filter bowl security. Filter bypass indicator extension. Missing cotter pins or safety wire. Are slippage marks in place and have they slipped or cracked? Are the oil level viewing plates stained, making it look like there's oil when there really isn't any? How do the elastomeric or greasable bearings look on the main and tail rotors? How do the hanger bearings and flex plate beveled washers and hardware look? All tie downs, covers, locking devices, and ground handling equipment must be removed and securely stowed. Perform a final pre-start rotor check by visually confirming that the main and tail rotors are untied and all panels and cargo are secured. Perform an operational check and take one last look for leaks before you commit to the flight. It's vital to devote additional time so you can detect those subtle mistakes, like improperly installed hardware or missing safety wire. If there's any doubt about the airworthiness issue, check with your mechanic, because once you pull collective, you are committed. For the FAA safety team and the U.S. helicopter safety team, I'm James Dangerfield.
Okay, here are the helicopter dirty dozen. And these are just 12 preconditions for unsafe acts. In other words, factors that influence people to make mistakes. This series of posters was designed by Gordon DuPont while working with Transport Canada. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's meant to stimulate the human factors discussion. These are also important for pilots and mechanics. This is our primary accident case study. Also, please note this accident was chosen because it hit many of the dirty dozen human factors. All of the organizations discussed are very professional, that they're trying to do good work in a safe manner. I'm going to probably read this whole slide for you just to get the gist of what happened. On July 28th, 2010 at 1:42 p.m., an Air Methods Corporation American Eurocopter AS-350B3 medical helicopter, November 509 Alpha Mike, during a VFR flight under Part 91, descended rapidly and collided with terrain in Tucson, Arizona. The aircraft was substantially damaged and consumed by a post-impact fire. The pilot and two medical crew flight members were fatally injured. The repositioning flight for engine coking maintenance originated at the Morena Regional Airport in Tucson at 1:32 p.m. And the intended destination was the Air Methods base in Douglas, Arizona. Oops, sorry about that. Let's get it right here. Went a little fast there. I apologize. I'm going to go back and read one little statement for y'all, just because this is very important. This is a witness statement. Interviews concluded that with the mechanics that they had recently worked on the helicopter, and the pilot who flew the helicopter prior to the accident, aircrew accepting the helicopter, revealed that the helicopter had been sent to Marana for maintenance. Okay, this is what the aircraft looked like before the event or the accident event. And just to let you know, I did work for Air Methods. They're, like I mentioned earlier, a very professional organization. I worked for them probably for about 7 years as a relief mechanic. Really enjoyed working on the A-Stars back then. It was a lot of fun. And this is what the aircraft looked like after the accident. External examination of the engine at the accident site revealed that the fuel inlet union was detached from the boss on the compressor case. The fuel supply line remained attached to the union and a hydromechanical unit via the adjusted valve. The intermediate gasket was located in the fuselage debris directly below the union. All right, lack of communication is the first of the dirty dozen we'll cover. As you can see at the top are the 12 of the dirty dozen, and below you see safety nets. Communication safety nets are use logbooks, worksheets, communicate and remove doubt. Shift turnover should not only be able to be written, but descriptive words should be used, such as left, right, top, bottom, and upper. Discuss the work that was done or what has to be completed. Make sure the person responsible for the aircraft to return to service knows the status of the aircraft. Never assume anything. Again, this is the format of the posters from that were created by Transport Canada and DuPont. So the first one we're going to cover, of course, is lack of communication, and we're actually going to cover the FAA inspectors and the repair station. In 1953, the Civil Aeronautics Board, which was the precursor of the FAA, revised the civil air regulations to require each operator to apply for OPSPECs at the time of application for an air carrier certificate. Air carriers that existed at the time were issued OPSPECs to be used instead of competency or temporary letters. The OPSPECs provided an effective method for establishing safety standards that address a wide range of variables. In addition, OPSPECs can be adapted to specific certificate holders or operators' class and size of aircraft and type and kinds of operation. Okay, we're going to review the slide and discuss the dirty dozen, lack of communication. So you might ask yourself, what does an OPSPECs look like? We're going to show you here in a second. Of course, we mentioned in the first bullet, the principal maintenance inspector stated he removed the work away from station authorization in 2008. When they interviewed the owner of the repair station, he stated he did not identify the change when signing page A004 of the OPSPECs. And here's what OPSPECs look like. The red arrow points to the paragraphs issued in this type of situation. A004 shown on the left of the page is the table of contents for the OPSPECs. The way I like to explain OPSPECs is a contract between you and the FAA that you will do your business in accordance with these OPSPECs. Over on the right, you see OPSPECs D100 or 100. This page allows the agency to operate on a temporary basis short term when special circumstances arise, such as a blown tire, a radio, navigation equipment changes. The page on the right states in general terms, the certificate holder is not authorized to perform continuous operations at additional locations other than the primary location. So there was a op specs in place that said they should not be doing any type of heavy maintenance. I would definitely consider removing the engine and disassembling the engine and reassembling it. Major operation, in my opinion. Okay, next up, same accident. We're going to stay on that one. Complacency. We're going to cover complacency, and you see below the safety nets. We also mentioned that complacency is caused by a lack of sufficient stress. We hear stress is bad from our health. Too much unresolved stress certainly is. However, we need a moderate amount of stress for optimum performance. Okay. As the Turbo Mecha Service Center, helicopter services in Nevada provided level 1, 2, and 3 maintenance service, parts, and tools. The Turbo Mecha Service Center technicians complete a Turbo Mecha design checklist and engine build form when performing field maintenance. Turbo Mecha does not require its outside service centers to document their work with the forms, and they are allowed to develop their own forms to document it. Helicopter services in Nevada had developed their own work order forms and checklists that were completed when work items were accomplished. When they interviewed the HSN, which is the Helicopter Services of Nevada mechanic, he reported that when an in-house inspection is performed, and when we say in-house, we're talking about at their repair station, the work order package form as well as a final inspection are completed. He reported that when mechanics are working in the field, which he was, they do not complete the 8130-3 form, do not do the thorough inspections and paperwork that occurs when engines come into the repair station due to the specific nature of the field work items. This means he was the only person to look at his detailed level 3 maintenance he performed and did not ask for help from the other nearby error methods mechanics, which could be considered complacency. And of course, the bullets just rehash what I went over. And that could be considered complacency. We always want you as a mechanic to challenge yourself to go above and beyond what the bare minimums are. So always think that way, and the FAA also. Here's those safety nets for complacency. Face reality. The reality we face in our industry is mistakes, even slight ones, may kill someone. Physical fitness are important. Create challenges for yourself. Never sign for anything you didn't do. All right, next up on the Dirty Dozen is lack of knowledge. It may seem that lack of a knowledge is about being inexperienced. However, the rational point of view is that aviation is incredibly complex. No one has all the answers. We all lack knowledge in tasks that we are not familiar with. Even experienced people need to refer to up-to-date manuals and ask questions. People can be very sharp and well-meaning, but if they're untrained, bad things can happen. I would challenge every new mechanic out there to read procedures before you let someone teach you that procedure. If they omit any of the procedures listed in the manual, make sure you go by whatever's in that manual. Okay, here's an example of lack of knowledge, and this has to do with the maintenance test pilot. So the maintenance test pilot went out and ground ran the helicopter. When he ground ran it, it had a leak. The next day, that leak was resolved, and the pilot performed another ground run. And then, after that ground run was done, he was able to do the following flight checks. As you look on the left of the slide, he did the droop check, rate of climb check, cruise power check, flight limiter indicator check, and the flame out check, and an auto rotation. When they interviewed the Turbo Mecha tech reps, they went into the manual and they found the actual items that were required. His check only took 7.5 minutes. They were able to calculate that by the computer on board. And the required items, which was the hover flight on the right of the slide, the max continuous power climb, the max takeoff power check, and the max continuous power level flight, required 30 to 45 minutes. A huge difference in the amount of time. So please, please always look at your manual and make sure you're doing the actual required items. Notice that the accident took place about 10 minutes after takeoff. If the correct, every one of these events could have prevented this actual event from happening. So make sure you're doing the right thing. Okay, lack of knowledge. Make sure you get training on type. Stay current, read your manuals, use up-to-date manuals, ask a tech rep. Those tech reps are out there to help you. You're probably listening to a lot of the tech reps that are actually briefing during this Concorde event. Call them up and ask them questions if you get into an area that may not be reflected in the manual, or you have a circumstance that pops up that doesn't follow the manual verbatim. Also, make sure you communicate. No pride. Communicate with this one is get help from someone else. This test pilot could have went to another test pilot, which we don't really have a lot of in the civilian world. It's maintenance check pilot. They end up having to do it all. So go into that manual, look up the information, and call another pilot who's very experienced test pilot. Okay, the next item on the Dirty Dozen is distraction, and their safety nets are listed below. Okay, does anyone have a cell phone? It's almost become a feature of our culture. Whether we're driving, listening to a speaker, or maintaining an aircraft, in some cases it can be disastrous. Our jobs and lives are full of distractions. Distractions will shift your focus from the job at hand and increases the potential for a prospective memory or place losing error. Distractions come in many forms, such as noises, bright lights, people, radio message, telephone calls, horseplay, and problems at home. This next event is about a pilot, but it could happen to a mechanic also, where they get distracted by that phone. The pilot was conducting a return cross-country business flight in a helicopter, and the weather was good and visibility was at least 10 miles. The last 5 minutes of the flight, the helicopter's GPS altitude varied between 6,200 and 6,456 feet. The terrain in the accident area was between 6,000 and 6,400 feet. The impact point was at 6,330 feet. Anybody want to guess what he was doing? Well, during the investigation, we found out. The NTSB and the FAA located the pilot's cell phone and his records, and it revealed that at 4:12, he called a rental car agency. Now, when they interviewed the rental car agency, the employee stated she could not tell that he was in a helicopter, but he did seem busy or distracted, and that she was mid-sentence when the line was disconnected. Well, as you can see by this formula, the pilot was likely using his cell phone during a low altitude flight and became distracted, which resulted in controlled flight into terrain. So a helicopter plus a cell phone adds up to this exact accident picture, which is what happened to this aircraft. And as you can see by the field out there, there was nothing around except for a big open field and blue skies. And for him to fly this into the ground is just, don't use your cell phone flying an aircraft. Now, what you can use is you can use equipment that is built into the aircraft that has a supplemental type certificate. And there are a few cell phone installations that have been done with the supplemental type certificate. But that does allow you not to be fumbling around loosely with your hands, trying to hold something up to your ear while you've got your hands on the controls. One thing to think about too is every helicopter has 3 controls. They've got to operate the collective with one hand, the cyclic with one hand, and then the other, they're using their feet to operate the tail rotor pedals. How can you do all that and operate a phone? I have no idea. I know you put a knee pad on, and that's a good way to do it, is have something on your knee mounted that you can just click with one hand when you need to. Of course, the safety nets for this one is don't use cell phones during maintenance or flying. Always finish the job or unfasten the connection. Mark the uncompleted work. Lock wire where possible or use torque seal. Double inspect by another or self. Use a detailed check sheet. And when you do the job, always go back 3 steps, or when you return to the job, go back 3 steps. Very, very important. Okay, the next on the dirty dozen is lack of teamwork. And as field mechanics, we're used to working alone, so the concept of teamwork can be real change in thinking. Today, we need to rely on our coworkers, and that can include other mechanics and other pilots. More than ever, as time passes, aviation becomes more and more complex. So make sure you pay attention to those safety nets. Reconfirm duties among team members. Team tasks require a full team. Communicate and follow those correct procedures. Okay, this is one I am guilty of, and I would say we probably all are as mechanics. Between the dates of July 24th and July 26th, the accident engine was disassembled first. And the mechanics realized, now there were 3 mechanics. There was the repair station mechanic, and there were the 2 air methods mechanics. They realized they would need additional parts and tooling to complete the job. The accident engine was set aside because they were already working on it, and the second engine was disassembled and the fuel manifold replaced. As the air methods mechanics completed the work on the second engine, the HSN mechanic or repair station technician replaced the fuel manifold on the accident engine. During the work on the accident engine, Module 3 was disassembled, the fuel injection manifold replaced, the engine reassembled by the HSN technician, including the fuel inlet union. The engine was reinstalled into the helicopter by the air methods maintenance personnel. The HSN technician inspected his own work, which, as an HSN technician working away from its fixed location, he had the authority to inspect his own work. So let's ask that last question in bold at the very end. What would have happened if the repair station mechanic asked the air methods mechanics to check his work before assembly or being covered up? Well, again, I mentioned as we go through this presentation, each one of these events could have prevented the accident from happening and the loss of 4 lives. I would say one thing about aircraft mechanics: if you're humble and you're willing to learn from other people, you will go far in the aviation industry. I had to learn a hard lesson because I was very proud when I began, and I slowly learned that the smart right way to make it anywhere, be successful and be good at your job, was to ask for help and ask for people to check your work. All right. Here are the items that were recovered with some figures to look at. This is the as received accident parts are displayed in the upper view of figure 1. Okay, the figure 1 is the top right picture. The lower view shows a closer view of the area where the fuel line with jet union is attached to the diffuser assembly with the copper gasket between. The components were intact, but reportedly found disconnected at the jet union to the diffuser connection. Note that the bolts, screws, and nut hardware were not found at the site. And so the thing about this fuel ring, it delivers fuel directly into the combustion chamber through the use of a radial fuel supply, centrifugal fuel injection system. And again, the bottom right corner shows all of the parts as they're assembled with everything included. And here's what the parts look like blown up. These are considered exemplar because some of these parts were missing, but this is what they should look like when they were being assembled. Note there's self-locking nuts on the top. You must make sure you check to ensure they have the proper drag torque according to the manual. If by chance your maintenance manual or your organization allows you to reuse self-locking nuts. If not, like in the military, we had to replace them every single time. But make sure they have that drag torque. Lack of teamwork. Communicate. It requires a full team. Reconfirm duties among team members and follow those correct procedures. Never assume someone else knows what is going on. Take responsibility to inform them yourself. Next up on the dirty dozen is fatigue. It's a constant threat to all of us. There are three types of fatigue. Acute and operational fatigue are really the same thing. They are caused by hard work and long hours. It is really only a matter of duration. Chronic fatigue, however, is something that requires medical intervention. It is depression and needs at least counseling and possibly medication. As you can see, acute and chronic are usually a little easier to alleviate. When you get down to the operational, it's where you haven't gotten hardly any sleep in 3 to 4 days, and it takes a couple of good nights or days of sleep to recover. So these are the symptoms of fatigue. These symptoms are true of fatigue people regardless of the category of the fatigue they're experiencing. This is a recommendation from another inspector, and I thought it was a good process. And what they did is, as you may know, mechanics do not have requirements for sleep and work hours like pilots do, which hopefully that will change. But what this inspector kind of informed me on, he basically explained to me that if you consider fatigue, you can almost compare it to a blood alcohol concentration, because you become impaired by both. You'll notice that after 17 hours, you have a 0.05% effect on your work, which is comparable to your blood alcohol concentration. After 22 hours of no sleep, basically you're awake for 22 hours, you have a 0.08%. And after 24 hours with no sleep, you go down to a 0.10% blood alcohol concentration comparison of the fatigue. Note, you're impaired staying awake for 17 hours in Argentina, Austria, Costa Rica, Germany, Spain, and Thailand. And you're also considered fatigued at 0.08, which is 22 hours in the US, Brazil, Canada, Ireland, and Singapore. Okay. Now, the next one we're going to cover is an accident that occurred that I'd like to go over. This is a different accident than what we covered earlier. This particular accident, I'm going to give you the outcome first, or as far as I'm going to give you the pre-events that took place before the accident occurred and before they did the maintenance. We mentioned these guys came in to do oddball shifts to work on an aircraft they were not originally scheduled to work on. So the shift they were originally scheduled was December the 6th, and they actually had to come in and work. So their normal shift for the mechanic would have been noon until 11 p.m. And the inspector also had the same normal hours from noon until 11 p.m. They were supposed to be off the day they came in, but instead, the mechanic came in a little before 6 a.m. and worked until almost 7 p.m. And the inspector came in around 5:30 a.m. and worked almost until 7 p.m. And the mechanic claimed that he only got 5 hours of sleep, and the inspector claimed he got 7 hours of sleep. Let's see what fatigue will do to people, but we're going to cover that later in the presentation. We're going to go ahead and cover something that's very important to all of us, and that is your circadian rhythms. We have an internal biological clock with a cycle of roughly 24 hours. Many of your bodily functions cycle about these daily circadian rhythms, such as blood pressure, heart rate, core body temperature, and others. Perhaps most important to us are those cycles about normal circadian rhythms. Whenever you have your typical circadian cycle, it causes performance to peak between noon and 9 in the evening, and then to fall to a minimum between 3 and 6 in the morning. The reason they use this picture is the Marines were interested in lowering the effects of jet lag when you travel long distances. They did some attempts to be able to do this. They found out it didn't work very well unless we followed the normal things that we know, like going outside in the daylight. If you, like, say you did travel across the globe and you went from the US to France, you would want to start eating and getting up at the same time they do in France. You want to go outside and get sunlight to hit your body. That will adjust your circadian rhythm. And it's not a quick process. Okay, here are some safety nets to prevent fatigue. Note that you can be aware of your own symptoms, and then others will actually notice you having the symptoms too. Avoid those complex tasks at the bottom of your circadian rhythm. Sleep and exercise regularly, and ask others to check your work. All right, next up is lack of resources. Lack of resources, parts availability is certainly important. However, to expand that topic of lack of resources, what would be a list of important resources? Money, parts are expensive. People, the mechanic called in sick. Time, deadlines to meet. Tools, specialized tooling we don't have, and we don't have the manuals, as in data. All right, we're going to go back to our original accident case study. We're going to talk about lack of resources. Now, we already read a little bit of this, so you'll remember this from earlier. Lack of resources may have contributed to a maintenance process error. You'll note in the beginning when I read this, the engine was disassembled and the mechanics realized they didn't have the parts or the tooling to complete the work. So that aircraft engine was set aside and another aircraft engine was worked on by the Air Methods mechanics. Then the accident engine was worked on by the repair station mechanic. If those parts and resources would have been in place, could all three of them have worked together to do both jobs? Yes, more than likely. And of course, those lack of resources led to that maintenance process mistake. Repair station mechanic inspected his own work and assembled the engine. The Air Methods technician inspected the engine after it was assembled and in the aircraft. What would have happened if they'd had the correct resources? Okay, here's some things to help the safety nets to prevent that lack of resources. Check suspect areas at the beginning of the inspection, and AOG the required parts. Order and stock anticipated parts before they're required. AOG, aircraft on ground. That means your aircraft's on ground. You usually FedEx something to you or you overnight it to get the parts in time to do the work. Know all available part sources and arrange for pooling or loaning. And that includes torque wrenches. You may have to order specific torque wrenches you may not carry at your workstation. So you may have to request that be overnighted in also. And then, of course, maintain a standard, and if in doubt, ground the aircraft. Okay, the next one is pressure. Back to our original case study again. A certain amount of pressure is good, but we mentioned this earlier. Too much pressure can cause a technician to make a mistake. If there's a generic hazard in aviation maintenance, it will be the pressure to produce. Pressure to produce causes a drift to dangerous methods. Features of pressure to produce are completion of work despite lack of resources, supervises condoning unapproved actions to get the aircraft underway, releasing the aircraft with work undone. Signs of excessive pressure to produce are being asked repeatedly, how long is this going to take? Getting frustrated and angry during the job, wanting to go home. All right, like I said, back to our original accident case study. The mechanics felt pressured after the first engine run up after maintenance. As you can see in the slide, they found out the Air Methods CEO was coming in for a visit. The Safford base was out of service. No backup aircraft was available since the backup helicopter was in use at Douglas. I was involved with a couple of these changeovers doing heavy maintenance on the A-Star that I worked on. We would fly in the spare aircraft. We would swap out all the medical equipment, put it in the spare aircraft, and then we would fly the main aircraft to a repair location where we could do the heavy maintenance. In this case, they didn't have a backup aircraft, so there definitely was some pressure to get that aircraft operational soon. And they interviewed the Air Methods Area Aviation Manager, and he said, there is some internal pressure on pilots and mechanics because they know if they're not getting enough flight volume per month, for example, 10 or less, then their base may be considered for closure. All the bases in Southern Arizona area were doing okay, though. So there was some perceived pressure. All right, the next example we have is a V-22 Osprey. This example was a long ago, back in 1992, right after the Osprey had come out. So this is a fairly early accident in the production of this aircraft. The V-22 was being ferried to a military base in Quantico, Virginia, when it suddenly plunged into the Potomac River while on a downwind for landing. This July 20th, 1992 crash killed all 7 crew members aboard. The court of inquiry, which when do military investigations, the FAA does not do the investigation, the military does it. They said that a fluid leak in the right engine may be attributable to the maintenance error of installing an oil seal backwards on the torque meter shaft. But the report added that it could not be conclusively determined that the reversed oil seal caused the leak. Thus, the possibility of other leak seals or sources could not be ruled out. In addition, the report said ground testing with incorrectly installed seals did not show significant leakage, but a leak did occur on another V-22 with an incorrectly installed seal, according to the government witnesses. So maintenance error could not be assigned with certainty, but is considered to be a probable cause factor. Another member of that court of inquiry noted that the system used to conduct maintenance at Elgin lacked organization, defined responsibilities, and a formal reporting and documenting structure. They had some secondary factors, including ineffective quality assurance for the oil seal installation, and the report added that procedures for removal and placement of torque meter seals contained in the technical manual were vague and introduced the potential for incorrect installation. And as you can see, this is a layout and how these tilt rotors operate. Of course, the right engine failed. It's a very complex machine, the way that thing rotates. The whole engine nacelle rotates and, of course, makes it a very complex operation. They also mentioned that another problem could have been the flammable fluid leak, which was ingested into the right engine. And of course, they mentioned what we read earlier. They were also inappropriately downsized, inadequately supervised, and too focused on the departure of both the team and the aircraft to ensure satisfactory completion of the maintenance requirements. Which of the dirty dozens do you think contributed to this accident? There's a bunch of them. We actually list about 5 of those. Short staff, lack of supervision, pressure, didn't properly double check their work, and lack of knowledge. Here are those safety nets. Make sure pressure is not self-induced. We all do that if we're very conscientious mechanics, or pilots. Make sure you don't induce your own pressure. Communicate your concerns, ask for help, and sometimes you just say no. Next up on the dirty dozen, again, we're looking at the poster, is lack of assertiveness. Mechanics as a group, we're not as assertive as we could be. We like to fix things, we like to fix the aircraft and leave the conflict to the managers. We don't like having people in our face. Our culture is a can-do culture. This is a inverted U diagram showing an example of assertiveness. Now, I'm actually going to use my mouse to point some things out here. On the left, you have your performance, high and low. So the higher up on the chart you go, the higher your performance. On the left and right, on the left, you have low, passive, acquiescence, compromise. or acquiesce. On your right of the chart, you have your rights, but you can also be too aggressive, anger, and you can offend people. Where do you think the best place to be is on this chart? Well, it's an inverted U, so let's say right here in the middle top. You want to be in the middle. You want to have a little bit of each one of these on each side of the chart. If you do, you'll have high performance up here at the top. Okay, so you want to consider other people's rights. You also want to consider your rights, especially if you're reading the manual and you're going by what it says. So the middle of that chart is where you want to be. Here's some safety nets for lack of assertiveness. If it's not critical, recorded in the logbook and only signed for what is serviceable, refuse to compromise your standards. Stress. Well, let's cover a little bit about stress. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that it motivates us to perform. We experience some kind of pressure to compel us to move. It can be pleasure or pain, but it is stress of some kind. We hear that stress is bad, but a moderate amount of stress helps us to perform to our optimum level. We're back to our chart again. This is a chart for stress. Remember, this is a real similar chart. You've got high performance up here. You've got low down at the bottom. Low stress is over here to the left. High stress is over to the right. Now, the interesting part about high stress is it is not good to have too much stress, because when you get too much stress, you can become fixated and actually tune out everything that's going on. So you want to make sure that you get a moderate amount of stress, but it never gets too high. You don't want to be too low. If you're too low, I always use the example of somebody sitting in their parents' basement. They don't want to go to work. They don't want to do anything. And their parents don't make them go get a job when they're adults. That is low stress. That is not good for that person. Those parents need to crack down on that young man or woman and say, look, get to work. At least give them some moderate stress. Get them out there on their feet. Get them working. Too much stress, that's a good example of combat. When you go to combat and people are dying all around you, it really affects your mental state, and it really does create issues with thinking. That is a huge amount of stress to deal with. Here's some safety nets that can help you get through stress. Be aware of how stress can affect your work. Slow down, stop and look rationally at the problem. This is a good example of you may be working on an aircraft engine, or you might be working in a hard to get to area. Slow down and look at the problem, and then determine a rational course of action and follow it. If you are working in a high stress area on an engine, and say you're putting in a fuel control and you're having to wiggle your arm in there and grab a nut and a bolt and try your best to hold that in place, and you keep trying to start that nut on that bolt threads and it will not start, go take a break. Take that break, or have someone do it for you. It's probably better to take that break and go back and do it, though, because you'll find out when you go back, you get it right on the threads the first try. If you have too much stress, discuss it with someone. Ask your fellow workers to monitor your work. Exercise your body. Lack of awareness is our next topic. Lack of awareness or reduced situational awareness can be an indication of one or more of the other human factors, issues that are in action, such as fatigue, distraction, or lack of communication. Here's an example of how the lack of awareness can cause some serious damage. And as we know, we're going back to our original case study. We have a few issues here on this aircraft. Now the NTSB mentions this first one, which is the first bullet. Aircraft operated at just below max gross weight. It had 90% of the required fuel for a 2.5-hour flight, but the flight was only 55 minutes and could have been a problem during auto rotation. Anybody who's ever flown in helicopters, which I have as a crew chief, as a mechanic, and I've been in the pilot seat a couple of times in the military, but you'll know that you never want to leave without a full tank of fuel because helicopters are just not like airplanes. They don't go as far on as much fuel as an airplane does, because you are beating the wind into submission, or the air into submission. But the NTSB said if they would have left with less fuel, it could have helped them in auto rotation. Also, they went and looked at the manuals and the maintenance logbooks and found out that they were operating past the cycles on one of the ADs. AD 2009-9-03 required an engine inspection at 5,000 cycles, but the engine had accrued 515 cycles. To continue on the lack of awareness with this accident, this is the amazing thing about this accident, is there were so many items that weren't correct that could have prevented the accident. Here's one of those oddball ones. The rotor RPM gauge location. Now, when any air medical company takes over a standard helicopter, they convert it into a medical helicopter. They move the instruments around, they moved items around, and usually they get a supplemental type certificate to do that. But this particular item had never had a 337 done, which allowed you to make a modification. And if there was an STC, it wasn't annotated. But it was located in a non-standard location per the manufacturer in the lowest left portion of the instrument panel. You can see that right here with this red arrow where it was located. And as you know, it is one of the primary instruments you need during an auto rotation. So let's picture this. He's trying to land this aircraft, and he's looking at the bottom of his instrument panel at a very small instrument, trying to keep those needles in the right place for an auto rotation. And it was not an easy task with the location. And then, of course, when they looked for the records, there was no documentation showing the relocation of the actual instrument. This is lack of awareness. This is the safety nets form. Think of what may occur in the event of an accident. Check to see if your work will conflict with an existing modification or repair. Ask others if they see any problem with the work done. And last but not least, norms. Now, in the context of the Dirty Dozen, our group has a better way to do this job than the published procedure. So when you say norms, that means we call it tribal knowledge, but it means, hey, we at the maintenance group or organization, we know a better way to do it than the manual reflects. Tribal memory is a great example. And unwritten rules enforced by the group, peer pressure, or habit. In the case that follows, someone decided to reuse a castellated nut that was worn out and would have not come loose if they would have installed the cotter pin. Also, if you go to the Merriam-Webster online dictionary, it defines norms as an authoritative standard, a principle of a right action binding upon the members of a group and serving to guide, control, regulate proper and acceptable behavior. And then it has some other definitions too, but I think that first one covers what we're talking about. Okay, this is the new accident study. This is the one where we were talking about the pilots and the inspectors' sleep deprivation, or working an odd shift when they weren't normally used to it. And here's the question for this AS350B2. Were norms in play? A series of maintenance errors were responsible for the December 7th, 2011 crash of a Sundance helicopters, Eurocopter AS350B2 in the mountains east of Las Vegas, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board says. So let's go back, and I want to catch a little bit of this maintenance information for you so we don't miss it. The pilot and all 4 passengers on the Twilight tour or sightseeing flight were killed in the crash, and the helicopter was destroyed. At an NTSB meeting convened to review the accident, Chairman Deborah Hirschman noted that research has shown that the primary category of maintenance error is failing to carry out necessary actions. So here's some questions we need to think through. They had done some maintenance on this aircraft and disconnected the fore and aft servo. And this picture shows what the actual rod end castellated nut and the cotter pin should look like when it's installed. You also notice in this picture they have torque stripe on it too. It's actually an extra safety thing, which is good. But that's what it should look like. But during this investigation, they questioned whether the organization would use self-locking nuts regularly without checking the self-locking serviceability. And you'll know that when you use the castellated nut, that plastic insert, if it's brand new, it ain't coming loose if you tighten it down to the proper torque. The cotter pin is double safety for you because it prevents it from backing out. As you know, helicopters vibrate violently when you're flying, and everything needs some kind of secondary device to keep it from backing out. We're going to go by the assumption that the cotter pin never went in and they did reuse the nut because we really don't know. But we do know this. Of course, I mentioned this earlier, the NTSB mentioned that they used the degraded self-locking nut, and then they mentioned the lack of an installation of a split pin. I call it a cotter pin, and inadequate post-maintenance inspections caused the in-flight separation of the servo control input rod from the fore and aft servo, and it rendered the helicopter uncontrollable. 4 people died in the accident. Down at the bottom, we're going to note here, contributing factors were the mechanics and inspectors' fatigue. We covered that earlier on the slide. And the lack of clearly delineated steps for the maintenance task and inspection, the NTSB said. So sad to say, but the pilot could not recover from this happening with that fore and aft servo coming disconnected. Now, here's what the accident scene looked like. And you can see in the wreckage, the red arrow points to that fore and aft servo. And you can see that the control rod is not connected and there's no hardware in that hole. And they also mentioned they were unable to find any of the hardware for that connection when they did the investigation. Okay, norms. Again, this is like tribal knowledge. Always work per the instructions or have the instruction changed, and be aware norms don't make it right. All right, here are the Dirty Dozen. That's based on the movie way back in the day. You see the stars listed there of the original movie where we stole this title from. I ask you to face reality because everything that you do is very, very critical in aircraft safety. If we make a mistake, it can cost many lives. So make sure that you maintain the aircraft at the highest standards, get people to look at your work. Know you're going to make errors, but that having that second set of eyes looking at it will help you. And I would also say train your pilots if you're at a remote site to look behind you on your work. This is the Charles Taylor Award. You need 50 years in aircraft maintenance. It can be a combination of military and civilian. Here is my contact information. I want to thank Concord Battery and industry partners for allowing me to present this. I'm James Dangerfield. There's my email. There's my phone number. Please call me if you have any questions or email me at that email. I thank you for your attendance. Have a good day.